Welcome to Out with Dan, the podcast that spotlights and examines the voices of LGBTQ+ authors, characters, and our allies. Together, we lift our voices and we tell our stories. I'm Dan White. Join me as I chat with this week's author. Hi, and welcome to Out with Dan. I'm excited today to have Dharma Kelleher join me for a discussion about the books that she writes. Hi, Dharma.
Hi, Dan. How are you?
I'm wonderful.
Thank you for having me on.
Oh, I'm very excited. I just finished Blood and Fire, which I've learned is a prequel to the Jinx Ballou series, and I enjoyed it so very much. Was there a particular inspiration for coming up with the Jinx character?
Well, yeah. Originally, I had written a previous series about a lesbian outlaw biker, and I decided that it was time to write something new. I wanted to write something with a transgender character, and since I'm transgender, and I was like, I don't want to write a cozy. I don't want to write a police procedural, even though I do read those subgenres. I love them, but that's not what I wanted to kind of push the envelope a little bit. And so I was talking to my wife about it. And she said, "Why not a bounty hunter?" I'm like, "Bounty hunter? And I had read several books in Jenna Ivanovich's Stephanie Plum series, but I was wanting to take something, and they're very entertaining, very funny, very wonderful. But I wanted to take it in a grittier direction, because that's kind of what I write, is that gritty, I
love it.
And so my wife came up with the idea of a bounty hunter, and the name, her last name Ballou, is an homage to Lawrence Block, who among many series he's written, his Matt Scudder series. There's a character called Mick Ballou, who's kind of this likable Irish gangster kind of character. I just love the character. He's kind of an ally to Matt Scudder in an odd sort of way. And so I liked the character. So I gave her the last name Ballou. And then the name Jinx, I loved the TV series In Plain Sight.
Yes.
And the main character's mother is named Jinx. I'm like, I really like that.
Yeah, so I like it.
That's where I kind of came up with it.
I like it. I was so impressed by the fact that Jinx has a supportive family network. I thought that was so beautiful, because we don't always get that.
But no, we don't.
When we do, it's so wonderful to be able to celebrate it. And I really appreciate you taking the time to create a family like that.
Yeah, I didn't have a family like that, unfortunately, but I've been inspired by people that do. And recently, Amber Briggle, I think her name is the mother of a trans teen in Texas, and she's been dealing with a lot of shit with their new laws and all that stuff. And she's been an inspiration to me. But there have been a number of wonderful parents who've been very supportive of their trans kids. And so I wanted to show that, hey, this is what it could look like if more parents were decent parents, So,
and thank you for that. And I mean it sincerely. It's I read a book by Becky Bohan recently, and one of the things she said in it was she wanted to create a book that was positive,
right?
As positive all the way through as possible. Hers is a romance, and so she didn't want an angsty type of romance,
right?
And we all know that in life there are some terrible parents out there.
Yes.
and that's unfortunate. And we see that in a lot of, it's represented a lot. So it's nice to see it when it's a supportive, loving family. So thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure. Thank you.
Yes. And I love the fact that she has, I mean, Jinx runs into some issues. There's some roadblocks. I certainly don't want to set this up as it's all hunky dory.
Oh no. I wanted to write a series of books where she's not defined by being trans. There's no transition stories. It's not about hormones or surgeries or anything like that. It's not a romance, although she has relationships throughout the series. But her experiences are shaped by her being trans. And so she runs into some, in Blood and Fire, she starts out as a patrol officer in the Phoenix PD. And she runs into a little trouble there. And she, in the first book in the series, she's actually outed by a local weekly alternative newspaper. And she had no idea that they were going to do that. She just thought they were going to be highlighting her. Here's this female tough as nails bounty hunter, and then suddenly the headline is like, transgender bounty hunter is tearing up the valley or something like that. It's like, it leads to some problems. It's hilarity ensues. But it doesn't define her life. The story is really about her work as a bounty hunter, going after fugitives and some complex stories that she runs into.
And that's a very interesting point for a reader as well, to see someone who's their own character already. And right. It's sort of a day in the life, to make that sort of sound simple.
Right. But, I mean, yeah, her being trans is really the least interesting thing about her. I mean, she cosplays as Wonder Woman at comic book shows. She's a comic book geek. You don't see a lot of that.
No.
And she's a bounty hunter. I mean, you don't see a lot of bounty hunter stories. So it's just, being trans is not the most interesting thing about her.
She's a wonderful character. I hear you have a Southern voice, a little bit of a Southern voice. So, and I do know this, so there's no need of attempting this. I also know that you went to UGA as well.
I did. I went to University of Georgia. I went to the journalism school, and they beat my Southern accent out of me. So I don't. Although when I get back home, I'll talk to my sister. And she's like, "Hey, how y'all doing?" And I start to pick it up again. But normally, I don't really have a very thick Southern accent, even though I spent the first half of my life in Georgia, around Atlanta, little small towns like Snellville and Lilburn, and then went to school in Athens. But I don't know, it just kind of never took.
Well, it's unique with mine. I had a lot of speech class, and I have an English degree.
Oh, okay.
I lost part of my accent, but then I moved to Miami, where I learned to use it as charming.
Oh, it is. You see, and there are many different Southern accents.
Yes, that is true.
You have the very charming Southern accent, a very genteel accent.
Thank you. So, is it very different? Because I know that you're self-published. I know that's something that you talk about. Is it very different than, say, would you call it traditional publishing versus self-publishing?
Yes.
Okay.
My first two books were published by a digital imprint of Random House.
Okay.
And it was a little bit different than a lot of traditional publishing deals, in the fact that, one, it was digital only, so there weren't any print books at the time. And two, rather than the usual split, we actually had a 50% split with no advance.
Oh.
Which is very unusual, but this was something that Random House was trying out for a few years. And I went through an agent. I had a really lovely, lovely agent. And after the first two books, they didn't sell as well as I had hoped. And certainly not as well as the publisher had hoped. So they opted not to continue the series after two books. And it had always been my dream to be traditionally published. As a teenager, I used to spend hours reading Writer's Market, looking for agents and publishers and places to send my short stories. And so that was always the dream. That was the benchmark. And after the first two books, I realized, okay, maybe it's not the dream that I thought it was. And the industry was changing. Way back in the day, traditional publishers would nurture authors, brand new authors, and let them have a few books and help build their name and build their platform.
Yes.
And they don't really do that, excuse me, as much anymore. And
sorry, I'm going to jump in for a second, which I find to be so very funny, because if
if you're looking for a payout as a publisher,
Right.
the more support you can give an author, the
Mm-hmm.
bigger your payout will probably be down the line. That isn't true for every author, but
Right.
for a lot of them it is. And of course, when you're an author who's swimming in a very large stream of a huge
Mm-hmm.
publishing house,
Right.
it's very easy to get lost.
Yes, it is. And it's their business model. It's their business. They have to make a profit. It is what it is. So after the second book, that's when I came up with Jinx Ballou, and I made the very difficult decision of walking away from my agent, who I really cared about. But I said, you know what? I'm going to go indie. And the Alliance of Independent Authors has been really instrumental in that success, because it's, in the early days of self-publishing, it was like you just throw up whatever onto Kindle, and then don't worry about a decent cover, don't worry about editing or anything like that, just whatever. And it got us a very bad stigma of self-publishing. And the Alliance of Independent Authors has worked very hard for 10 years to counter that, and to establish a set of standards. Like, you need to hire professional cover designers, you need to hire a professional editing team. And they've really worked very hard to educate independent authors for what they need to do so that we can compete with the traditional publishers. And so I took that to heart. So all of my books, I have a line editor, I have a proofreader, a separate proofreader, and many of the books that I've self-published, I've used a professional cover designer. Now, I've got graphic design background myself.
Oh, okay.
And so I now create my own covers. But I have to be very mindful, okay, because a cover does two things. One, it has to establish how professional this book is. Because generally how professional the cover is indicates the level of how well it's been edited, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And two, it has to convey the genre, subgenre of the book. It doesn't have to convey the characters. It doesn't have to even really convey the setting per se, but it has to tell potential readers, okay, this is a professionally put together book, and this is what genre it is. So you have what expectations to have. And that's really what it's about. And so I've learned to do that. And I push the boundaries a little bit myself, but
Good. You should push the boundaries. It's important, as a sighted individual,
mm-hmm.
when I look at a book's cover, I should get at least a sense of what I'm looking at, and
right.
as just so that old saying, you can't judge a book by the cover. That's bullshit.
Oh, it is.
I mean,
it is
it's
bullshit.
total bullshit, because that is how that's what draws us to a book. Unless you're looking at a book that's 100 years old and they're all burgundy leather bound.
And to be fair, there have been some traditionally published books that have horrible covers.
Yep.
There was several years ago, I don't know who the publisher was, one of the big five, put out a new version of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and it had this horrendous, creepy cover. You probably saw it.
Uh-huh.
It's just like, oh my God, what is it? It looked more like something from it's just like pedophile kind of creepy.
Yes, and if it's not appealing, it's not. Sadly, it's just not going to work.
Yeah, it's like this is not, no. And so, for the one of my new books that's going to be coming out later this year, I stepped a little bit away from the traditional thriller cover. It's a little bit more illustrated, but I think it still works. It conveys a certain sense of darkness and grittiness. So, we'll just see how it goes.
I like it. So I also subscribe to your newsletter, which I really do enjoy. And the last one, I want to talk about something you put in the last one. And it was the saying, we all have the same 24 hours.
Yeah.
And I know what you said, so I'm going to say I echo the sentiment 100%. It's there's so many things in life that come along that we can beat ourselves up over.
Right.
Because
Absolutely.
especially if we begin to compare,
Mm-hmm.
you're talking about Sean Cosby, his wonderful success.
Yes.
I'm thrilled to death. But if we begin to compare ourselves, or we get home and we think, oh, I woulda, coulda, shoulda, those are the three most limiting, verbs in the language.
Yeah.
And what I do with my 24 hours is my business.
Yes, absolutely.
And learning to celebrate that as well, not and saying it positively, that this is my 24 hours. Maybe I might have done more, but I did what I could. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Not Lindsay Broker, Andrea Pearson, who was a host of the Six Figure Author podcast, shared a lot about some of her own challenges. She has had a lot of health challenges. She also has a lot of young children that she has to take care of. And she has a lot more responsibilities than other people. I have to help take care of my wife because she has some disabilities. And I've got a day job with an 1.5 hour long commute each way. Yeah.
Ouch.
So we may have the same 24 hours, but we don't have the same responsibilities.
No,
and so the point of that post in the newsletter was just to honor yourself and don't beat yourself up that you're not accomplishing more than you already are. You may even actually be accomplishing more than you should be, because you may be on your way to burnout. And I know, because I've been there.
A friend of mine sent me something the other day, and the little quote was something along the lines of, being a great multitasker is the best way to burn yourself out.
Absolutely. I listen to a lot of other podcasts, and I mentioned Sasha Black, I think, before we got on the air or something. And she's an amazing one, but she's been struggling with a lot of burnout the past year or so. And bless her heart, she's an amazing person. And to her credit, she's been making conscious decisions to cut back on some of the things that she's been doing and to say no to things. She had been doing a podcast with another author, and they mutually decided to end that podcast. She still has another podcast that she's doing. I mean, she's like doing 2 podcasts and doing all this stuff and just running all kinds of stuff. So she's an amazing woman. She's also raising a young child, and so but she's now taking better care of herself, and that's a good example for the rest of us to follow. Is if you're feeling burned out, you may just have to say no to some things, and you just may have to let some balls drop on the ground and see what happens.
Absolutely. I've said more than once that I'm the queen of no. If I don't want to do something, it's just no. And most often it's just when I'm sort of at the end of the rope, because otherwise I'm like, oh yes, let's go to more place, blah blah blah. Yeah. But some days you just have to say no, because it's for the self-preservation and your own mental health.
When I'm up against a deadline, I'm gonna say, okay, I'm not worrying about cleaning the house. I'm not worrying about the laundry. It's like, there's no groceries. Peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. You'll deal with it.
And I have learned that laundry will not do itself, nor will it talk back to you. I mean, it'll just sit right there, patiently waiting.
Yes.
What better thing in life?
Exactly.
Dharma, will you tell me how to reach you on social? Share with everybody your social and your website.
My website, that's where I really like to direct people to go, is to dharmakelleher.com. That's DharmaKelleher.com. And you can if you're in the States, you can buy signed, personalized copies of my books.
Yes.
You can buy ebooks directly from me, and they get delivered via Book Funnel, which is really a great service. Or you can find me on Facebook at I think it's dharmakelleherbooks.com, or at Facebook / Dharma Kelleher Books, I think it is, and on Twitter at Zen Punk Dharma. And I think I'm on Instagram too, but I don't know what my handle is. Probably Dharma Kelleher. I don't know.
There's some days I wish I didn't know what mine was, but
I'm not as on social media as much as I used to be, just because I've got so many responsibilities.
And you
Right now,
have
I'm about to send one book to the editor. I've got another book coming out next month. I've
wow.
got a third book that I'm about to start writing and I'm doing research for.
Wow. Well, I'm sure you're bored, so maybe you pick up a couple of side projects, Dharma.
Exactly,
Well, I had such a wonderful time chatting
I
with
did
you.
too. It's always good to talk to a fellow Southerner.
Thank you. Same here. I look forward to doing it again as well. So
Absolutely.
thank
Thank
you
you
so much. And if you'll hang on, I'll be right back. Thank you for joining me for Out with Dan. See you soon.
Thank you for joining me for this week's episode of Out with Dan. You can find more information about this podcast and its host at outwithdan.com, on Twitter at OutWithDan, and on Instagram and Facebook at GoOutWithDan. This podcast is hosted by Authors on the Air Global Radio Network, and the theme music is provided by bensound.com. Join us again soon for the next episode of Out with Dan.